Are you trying to align your product team and your leadership team on an agreed upon method for prioritization? In this episode of Fearless Product Leadership, I talked to 5 experienced product leaders working in B2C and B2B, startup, growth, and mature companies. And they tell me their favorite methods for prioritization. In it, you're going to learn the important distinction between prioritization and sequencing, and you're going to learn about the critical importance of a North Star.
So I know what does not work. Yeah. So setting priorities with gut feel is risky. Yeah. Still, it may work for a while in a product life cycle, so if you're onto something and you know that this is something where you have to drill, where you have to go deeper, putting things into the right order sometimes it's simple. It's the logical order of how things have to be built, and then there is there's no big opportunity costs to think about. So that's where gut feel or logical thinking is enough, and then it becomes difficult because you have to think about opportunity costs. You have to think about how to maximize the value of the backlog. And I think the best method I have today is a scorecard. Having multiple criterias, balancing the criterias against each other, coming with some numerical quantifiable number that you can put on a story or on a feature, and try to sort the things. And this is just for your first order approximation of priority, because then you have commitments and you have I don't know what. You have to deal with reality, like teams and their skills, and also it's important to differentiate. Actually, that's a very important thing to realize, that priority is not order. So the sequence that you do things should reflect as much as possible the priority that comes out by this scoring of features, but it will never be the same. You will never be able to just deliver your stories according to the priorities. I never seen that working actually. So maybe there is, but I never saw that working. Yeah. So the scorecard would be my best instrument at the moment. I'm not sure if that's the best one, but it's the best I know of.
Realized over the years, there's 2 different ways to look at prioritization. There's the business prioritization for the company as a whole, and then there are day-to-day product manager prioritizations that you have to make. I like to sort of divide them between business being prioritization and the product managers being more sequencing, which are subtle differences, but I think they're important. And here's why. So at Evite, we set strategic priorities for the year. Those are set from the top. Those are set from Victor. They are not necessarily specific to moving a metric, but moving an area of the business, which is nice because it gives us freedom as product managers and as a company to fill in the way to get there. So he sets the North Star every year, and we set the plan to get to that North Star. So what we did this year under my new role was we had a bottoms-up project brainstorm where we allowed everyone in the company to sort of pitch the projects that would go under those strategic priorities. So the North Star is set by the business, by the CEO, but we as a team can talk about how to move those KPIs. Once those came in and were presented, the senior team actually prioritized which projects we would work on for Q1 and Q2. And I purposely did it for half a year, and that's sort of my annual roadmap. I don't believe in annual roadmaps. I think when I think about what my product theory is or product management theory, it's like the first thing I don't believe in is an annual roadmap, because what you learn in the beginning of the year changes everything that you're going to do at the end of the year anyway. So how many years do we have to keep redoing this ridiculous thing? That's another question aside. So I commit to 6 months. 6 months is enough because you can do big projects, you can do little ones, and you can learn something in 6 months. You could probably even learn something in a quarter, really, but try to give people a little bit more time so they don't feel too tight. We decided which priority projects we would work on. There's 3 projects under each strategic priority. So there's 15 projects, medium-sized things that we're working on throughout the company. So from the finance team to the product team to the development team, and everyone has sub-team priorities that fit under there. So for example, if we're launching a new product, data team has to be able to tag what it needs to happen. The finance team needs to be able to process the revenue that goes with that new product. So there's all kinds of things where you can really see what your day-to-day work fits into the bigger goal. So when it comes to a cut line for prioritization, it actually makes things really easy. We're working on these things and these things alone. So if it's not on this list, we're not working on it. So it does cut the what about if we did X sort of stuff. But then, okay, we still have 15 projects and you still have to prioritize within them. There are 3 that are about the business today, and there are 2 strategic priorities that are about the business tomorrow. The business today, those 3 take priority over the other 2. So there we have a little bit more. And from there, we have to sequence. So prioritization is more of like I said, in my opinion, a company-wide view of what's important. Sequencing has all kinds of other factors, right? That's where the product managers get to play Tetris with the developers, right? So you're balancing impact and feasibility. You don't always want to do the highest impact and easiest things to do, because then you're never going to get big, giant boulders through the system. So when it comes to prioritization, figuring out if these are the things that we're focusing on, and there's a lot of them, what things are small, medium, and large, and how do we make sure that we get the large started early and fill in, rocks and sand to the rest of the sprint. So instead of putting the prioritization on the PMs, we put the sequencing on the PMs. So we take off the load of pressure of what is most important. I've worked at Evite for a long time, and back in the day, the product managers had to sort of decide what was most important. And it became sort of what stakeholder was the loudest or the last to talk to us. And then their stuff got done. It was never prioritized from a business perspective. So again, when I think about great high-performing organizations moving in the same direction, it's because that direction is set from the top in a big way. And when I talk to product leaders who don't have a North Star, so much of their time is doing that sort of CEO level prioritization, in my opinion. So it's no wonder they can't get stuff done or they can't move the needle, because they're too busy sort of doing the job above them, in my opinion.
Prioritize is something that's evolving pretty dramatically. I came from e-commerce where we led a system of prioritization that we went in and force ranked everything. And we took so it was just a disaster beforehand, got everybody's request into one basically spreadsheet. Eventually it moved into a product management tool that we use. We force ranked it. We forced everybody to sit down with kind of the guidance that let's rank this based off of the overall value to the company, not taking level of effort into consideration. And that's a big change for people to get their head around. And the reason that we did that was to ensure that we had the North Star. Are we going after the things? Do we know what is the most important thing in our organization? Is that our North Star? Is that something that might take 2 or 3 years for us to get to? Yeah, it might take 2 or 3 years of concerted effort to deliver something like that. But if we think it's the number one value, let's find our way to that place. So really did a force ranking, no level of effort. That has to go hand in hand with a roadmap. How do you deliver? When are you delivering things? Sometimes you're going to be working on number 2, number 20, and number 48, right, in your list. And you have to be able to tell a cogent story as to why that makes sense, right? And what are the trade-offs that you're making? Why aren't you working on number 1, right? If that's in your product team, right, or your group. The other thing that I found has to come with that kind of prioritization process is that the teams have to carve out operational capacity outside of that. So those end up being the big strategic things that are multi-week, multi-months, multi-year. You still have the day-to-day operations improving your product, right? It's not a project-based organization. You're a product organization. So you have to carve out, depending on what your product team is, some operational capacity there. That is the first stuff to go if the team is not doing their jobs extremely well and running a tight ship, right? So they all of a sudden start to bleed that out. They starve the product. They work on the shiny new thing. And then all of a sudden, months later, you're wondering why you have churn on your customer base. So that's how I've done it. When I brought it over to my new company, which is a product-based company, it was great to bring everybody in because this is cross-functionally. People are agreeing to the prioritization, so people can't say, oh, you like this idea better, and so you did this guy's idea or whatever it might be. You're not playing favorites if everybody's together. So we started there. What I found is people were really looking for our team to be the thought leaders. Our team was becoming very senior in the space. And so we have started to move slightly away from that, where the teams are feeding their own queue. They're putting out their annual goals. They understand what the big things are they're going to move towards, and they're publishing out, this is what's going to happen. Now, they're not dictatorships. They sometimes, get things that are inserted from myself or the CEO of our leadership team or an acquisition that comes in. And so, what we want to do in those positions is make sure they understand the context on why that's important for their product and that they come to an agreement of that it is. And maybe they don't. Sometimes they don't always agree. But, you just have to work through those one-off. So I'd say on our journey to more autonomous teams, we're trying to also more autonomously control our prioritization.
As we're pursuing these different ideas, and each team has their own ideas that they're pursuing, we can understand TAM, and that's probably the first lens. What's going to have the biggest impact, because we're trying to grow as quickly as possible, right? And growth in both customer base and revenue. So it's nice to know what the overarching goal is for the company. We're at a size where it's simple. Everybody's got the same revenue and growth goals. Once we do that, prioritization becomes a much simpler question, because based on the research we did, we can right size a solution, because we're not saying yet we want to grow the TAM by 10% or by the customer base by a certain number. We're saying we believe that we can do it using this. What can we build that we can learn the right way to do it? And so we tend to build high quality, smaller things first and launch them, maybe test them or launch them and look at them against a benchmark we had, and then say, okay, now this thing is really working well. This one, not so much. Let's invest a lot more in that. And so when we're looking ahead to, what we're building on what we may have built 2 months ago, and that thing was a winner. We'll build more and invest more into it while we're also building something that we can learn from again. So it's this learn and iterate cycle that makes it so easy. And I think that for us, the biggest win on this has been that we can get to know and nobody feels bad. There's very little investment. You might have 10 customer conversations and be like, it's a non-starter.
What is my favorite method of prioritization? I would say, if you really have a good rubric or hypothesis of how your business is solving, it becomes pretty easy to say what is going to be the biggest rock in the river. And if you're not familiar with that analogy, it's like if a ship's coming into a river and there's rocks in the river, the size of the ship that you can get in is only going to get in if the largest rock is removed. And once that largest rock is removed, then the next largest chip that can come in has to remove the next largest rock. And so it's pretty easy if you have a hypothesis, but the key is you don't ever have the right hypothesis. So as you go along and you're prioritizing, you might have a good model for exactly what it is you think is the highest rock in the river. But as you start to go into the channel and you bump into it, you're like, oh, we need to change the hypothesis. We need to change the model. That said, you can't have your model like moving all over the place because you're like flitting from place to place. So hopefully you've come up with something a little bit more long term. But then on the priority side, always try and solve for something with more options, right? So if one option is, we're going to get this and we're going to get 10, whereas this, we might get 3, we might get 7, we might get 12. That's usually the better option because then the uncertainty has more opportunity to settle itself. So I'm a big fan of options and treating things as options. So when you're prioritizing, think about what opportunity there is to pivot from that particular thing as opposed to going laser focused. Now, as your business evolves and uncertainty declines, then those more sure bets that have less uncertainty are going to be your better bets. But from a priority model, you want to understand where your uncertainty is and how it works.
Product leaders know all too well the importance of aligning on priorities. The product leaders that I coach are often coming from a place where the leadership team simply has not aligned on the North Star and the product teams do not have clear goals. And that is one of the most important things that I work with them to establish. I quickly work with the product leader and the leadership team to recognize the reality of where they are and to establish that North Star and priorities so that they can set meaningful goals for their product teams and evaluate the trade-offs between different possible investments. If this sounds like the type of issue that you're struggling with as a new product leader, please do get in touch on LinkedIn or Twitter because it is some of the most rewarding work that I do and I would love to be able to help you with it.